You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood, art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted Weekly Art History for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're looking at Mark Rothko and his Seagram Murals. Mark Rothko was born Marcus Rothkowitz in 1903 in Dvinsk, Russia, which is now in Latvia. He was raised in a Jewish family that valued intellectual pursuits and held progressive political views. He would change his name from Rothkowitz to Rothko. Although he was settled in the U.S. and became a U.S. citizen, Nazis were on the rise, and some accounts say Rothko just felt it would be safer to change his name to something that was less identifiably Jewish. Rothko's formative years were marked by the omnipresent shadow of anti-Semitism. Growing up in a region where Jews were often scapegoated and persecuted, he experienced firsthand the corrosive effects of prejudice and discrimination. This sense of vulnerability and displacement would become a recurring theme in his art, which often evokes a sense of yearning and a search for spiritual solace. In 1910, Rothko's father and two older brothers emigrated to the United States, seeking refuge from the escalating anti-Jewish sentiment and the looming threat of conscription into the Tsarist army. His father was a pharmacist, he was an intellectual, and very far left politically. He was a self-proclaimed Marxist, and he instilled in his children a critical perspective on social structures. 3 years later, Rothko, his mother, and his sister joined them in Portland, Oregon, embarking on a new chapter in their lives. Unfortunately, the family's hopes for a brighter future were soon dashed by tragedy. Shortly after their arrival, Rothko's father passed away, and this left the family emotionally and financially devastated. Rothko was just 10 years old at the time, dealing with the traumas of leaving home, settling in a new land where he didn't speak the language, losing his father, and his family being financially insecure. These early experiences, the richness of his Jewish heritage, the specter of anti-Semitism, the upheaval of immigration, and the profound sorrow of losing his father indelibly shaped Rothko's worldview. He felt deeply for those who struggled. He considered himself to be the working person's artist, and throughout his life he would struggle not only financially, but also dealing with depression and alcohol abuse. Still, for all his struggles, Mark Rothko's brilliance was evident from an early age. From 1921 to 23, he studied at Yale. Now, Rothko was a great painter, and Yale has one of the greatest painting programs in the United States, but he didn't study art there. I'm sure his studies at Yale were helpful in shaping his artistic lens, as all education helps sharpen the mind and get students thinking critically about subjects, making connections, and all of that. But Rothko initially intended to pursue a career in engineering or law. I feel like that comes up a lot. It's a similar story with Kandinsky, Caillebotte, Cézanne, and others. Maybe I'll have to make a little Spotify playlist of artists who initially planned to study something else. Anyways, while he was at Yale, Rothko was studying things like the humanities. He studied English, French, European history, as well as sciences, math, physics, biology, and economics and philosophy. In 1923, he moved to New York City and briefly attended the Art Students League, studying under Max Weber. Weber's emphasis on Cézanne's formal structure and color theory left a lasting impact on Rothko's early works. Rothko spent countless hours in New York City's museums and libraries. He immersed himself in art history and explored the works of both past and contemporary masters. This self-directed study allowed him to forge his own artistic path and developed a unique visual language. His early works were deeply influenced by surrealism and psychological theories by people like Carl Jung, who believed that within a person's subconscious mind, there was a personal and then a second sort of collective unconscious, which consisted of shared archetypes or ideas that were ubiquitous across space and time. Mark Rothko's early works explored dreamlike imagery and symbolic forms. He was fascinated by ancient mythologies and their universal narratives, drawing inspiration from the emotional intensity and primal symbolism found in these timeless stories. The American painter Milton Avery was a close friend and mentor to Rothko. Avery's use of simplified forms and vibrant colors really resonated with Rothko, inspiring him to experiment with similar techniques and develop his own signature style. In the 1940s, Rothko underwent a significant stylistic shift, moving away from figurative representation towards abstract expressionism, although he didn't particularly care for that term. Aside from the fact that he, like many other artists, didn't like to be confined to a single movement or have his complex, nuanced work reduced to a simple label, Rothko felt the label Abstract Expressionism emphasized the formal aspects of his work, neglecting the deeper philosophical and emotional content he sought to express. Still, he was in the New York scene with other abstract expressionists. Clifford Still and Barnett Newman inspired Rothko to focus on large-scale canvases filled with soft-edged rectangular blocks of color. In addition to visual artists, Rothko found inspiration in the music of Mozart. He famously loved Mozart for the powerful, direct style. Rothko believed that the most profound artistic expressions often arose from a distillation of complex ideas and emotions into their simplest form. Mozart's ability to convey profound truths through seemingly effortless melodies resonated deeply with Rothko's own artistic philosophy. Mark Rothko reduced his paintings to these simple, soft-edged, rectangular shapes in a variety of hues, and this approach, often referred to as color field painting, became his signature style and a defining characteristic of the abstract expressionist movement. Now, Mark Rothko was notoriously secretive about his techniques. I mean, he refused to let even his studio assistants watch him paint. Still, careful examination of his works and research have revealed some keys to his approach. He often worked on unprimed canvas, allowing the paint to soak into the fabric and create this stained effect. This further enhanced the sense of luminosity and depth in his works. He thinned his paints to create washes of color, which would be layered with large house painting brushes. He would sometimes mix in things like resin, which would help to speed up the drying time so that he would be able to paint another layer of colors within just a matter of hours. He applied multiple thin layers, building up a complex interplay of hues and textures. And this layering process created a depth and luminosity, giving the impression that the colors emanated from within the canvas. The thing is, these works don't reproduce well in print or on the screen. There's a subtlety that can only be taken in slowly and in person. Rothko himself would sit for hours staring at the work, planning and fine-tuning the washes of colors. There are subtle shifts not only in color, but also the surface quality. Some washes would be more matte, while others a bit glossy, so they might catch the light differently when viewed from different angles. And sitting before these works, the massive scale of the piece is a part of the work. It overwhelms your field of vision. The soft-edged rectangles begin to hover in an abstracted space, and it transforms to a portal into a world of pure color and emotion. Rothko famously said that his paintings were not really about color. He said if you look at his work and see just the play of one color against another, you've missed the point entirely. I would argue that if so many people missed his point entirely, then perhaps it's partly a failure to communicate. And on that note, I'm going to leave things dangling for just a little bit as we have a short commercial break, and then I'm going to share probably the most famous incident in which Rothko's work just didn't land with the audience the way he probably would have liked. In 1958, Mark Rothko was commissioned to create a series known as the Seagram Murals to adorn the luxurious Four Seasons restaurant in New York City's iconic Seagram building. The Seagram building was the distiller's new corporate headquarters on Park Avenue in Manhattan, and they were pulling out all the stops. The building was designed by Mies van der Rohe, who was among the most famous and influential architects of the day. For his part, Rothko would be paid $35,000, which would be the equivalent of around $370,000 today. It's a pretty good payday, but Rothko apparently had something else in mind. As I said earlier, Rothko considered himself to be a bit of a working person's artist, so why make these paintings to decorate a fancy restaurant? He felt like the restaurant was a space for the rich and well-connected to eat decadent meals and simply show off and be seen. He said it was criminal for anyone to pay more than $5 for a meal, which would probably be more like $50 in today's money, and he didn't want to help them enjoy that meal. He wanted them to choke on it. Rothko is quoted as saying he painted the Seagram murals so the wealthy elites of New York would come to the Four Seasons and, quote, feel that they are trapped in a room where all the doors and windows are bricked up, end quote. He said this work was in part inspired by a trip to the Villa of Mysteries in Pompeii, the ancient city famously buried under volcanic ash when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE. He said he wanted to ruin the appetites of everyone who came to eat in that room. To achieve this effect, he departed from the bright palette of his previous works. Instead, the Seagram series embraced a darker palette, dominated by maroon, brown, and black, occasionally punctuated by flashes of deep red. This dramatic shift in tonality reflected Rothko's growing disillusionment with commercialism and the superficiality of high society, expressing a profound sense of introspection and unease. The somber hues applied in Rothko's signature style of soft-edged, rectangular forms create an atmosphere of contemplation and emotional intensity. The blurred boundaries between these forms, their subtle variation in tone, the interplay of light and shadow evoke a sense of mystery and ambiguity. The paintings invite viewers to step into a space where their own anxieties and vulnerabilities can be both acknowledged and transcended. The thing is, just before he was set to deliver the collection of 30 paintings, he went to the restaurant to see the space. He realized that with the wall of windows and that open, airy feel of Mies van der Rohe's architecture, these paintings would never seem sufficiently somber. They would read as simply a modern abstract painting in a modern skyscraper. Rothko returned the money and put the paintings into storage. He said, quote, anybody who will eat that kind of food for those kinds of prices will never look at a painting of mine, end quote. And they sat in storage for years until he finally donated 9 of them to the Tate in London, where they set up a room to his specifications. He dictated how high on the walls to hang the paintings, the color of the walls, even the lighting. The result is a sort of modern temple, a quiet, contemplative space to take in those somber works. They would be delivered to the Tate on February 25th, 1970. It was the very same day that Mark Rothko was discovered in his studio after he died by suicide. And to end this episode, I actually want to shift the focus away from Rothko. If you're struggling, just remember that things can get better. the first step is to reach out. This may sound like an ad read, but it's not sponsored content. I'm not affiliated with any mental health organization, but I want everyone to take care of themselves and get help if and when they need it. In the US, we have the phone number 988 as a suicide prevention and crisis line. And of course, I'll include a link in the show notes for 988lifeline.org. Remember, you don't have to face things alone. There's always someone available to help. It's free and confidential.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.